A 21-year-old girl leans over her mother's hospital bed, past the tubes and the monitors, to whisper the proudest thing she can think of, that she's finally dangerously thin. In her family, that isn't a confession. It's the gift she's been trying to give her whole life. Quick note, this is an independent, unofficial summary and review. It reflects the book's own account and the author's views, not claims of fact by this channel. That girl is Jennette McCurdy, the kid millions grew up watching on Nickelodeon, and the title of her memoir is the 6 words most people couldn't believe she'd write. I'm glad my mom died. By the end, you'll understand why that sentence isn't cruelty. It's the moment she finally became a person. But to get there, she had to do the one thing a devoted daughter is never allowed to do. Take her mother down off the pedestal. Stay to the end, because the last scene standing at that grave is one of the most honest things anyone has written about grief. To understand the daughter, you have to start with the mother. Deborah McCurdy was 4'11", and she was the son the whole family orbited. She'd survived stage 4 breast cancer when Jennette was 2, and she talked about that cancer the way most people talk about a favorite vacation. She'd even gather the kids to rewatch old home footage of herself at her sickest. In the crowded, cluttered house in Garden Grove, everyone learned to read Deborah's moods and keep her happy. Because when she wasn't happy, the whole house shook. And Deborah had a dream, not for herself, through her daughter. When Jennette was 6, her mother sat her down and asked, in a voice that already knew the answer, "You want to be mommy's little actress?" There was only one right answer. So a 6-year-old signed up for a dream that had never been hers. It was her mother's own thwarted ambition, handed down like an inheritance. Jennette became the family's little peacekeeper, the one who calmed the screaming between her parents, the one who kept everyone steady. Her grandfather saw it and said the truest thing in the whole book. A little girl shouldn't have to worry about her entire family. You deserve to be a kid, but being a kid was the one role the job would never let her play. Acting became the family business, and Jennette was good at it. Her signature skill was crying on cue, and the way she got there tells you everything. She would imagine the people she loved dying, on command, take after take. A little girl manufacturing grief to order, while her mother worked the casting directors with the story of her own cancer. Off camera, the control only tightened. Deborah called Jennette her best friend, but a best friend she also owned. She managed her daughter's food, her clothes, her friendships, her body, her every feeling. When Jennette's anxiety showed up as compulsions and rituals, Deborah reframed them as messages from God rather than a problem to treat. Because Jennette wasn't allowed to be a child who needed help. Jennette was perfect. Perfect was the job. And once, quietly, Jennette tried to quit. She said she didn't want to act anymore. Her mother didn't argue. She wept and kept weeping until the guilt was unbearable and Jennette took it all back. So she learned the family's deepest rule. Her own feelings were dangerous, and the only safe emotion in the house was her mother's happiness, which meant that the moment her own body started to change, it wouldn't feel like growing up. It would feel like a betrayal. Here is the wound the whole book grows out of, and it arrives disguised as love. Jennette was 11, frightened of growing up, terrified that becoming a woman would end her career as her mother's little girl. And her mother offered a solution, a secret thing just between the two of them, a way to stay small forever. What Deborah was really teaching her daughter was an eating disorder, but she wrapped it as intimacy, as closeness, as a special bond only they shared. The one person responsible for feeding this child taught her instead to disappear and made it feel like being chosen. When doctors and other parents noticed the warning signs, Deborah smiled and deflected and hid it. So Jennette learned to measure her own worth by how little space she took up. And she learned it from the person she loved most. Then the big break came. Jennette booked a role on a Nickelodeon show, playing a loud, fearless, sarcastic girl, the opposite of who she really was. And overnight, she was famous. On that set, she made her first real friend, a co-star her own age, the first person who felt like a normal part of a normal life. For a moment, the dream looked like it might actually be worth it. But fame didn't loosen the leash. It shortened it. There was more money now for her mother to control, more eyes on her changing body, more pressure. The man who ran her show pushed for revealing costumes and steered a first on-camera kiss she didn't want. The same man, she says, first handed her alcohol while she was still a teenager. The dream her mother had chased for both of them had finally, completely come true. And from the inside, it felt less like a dream than a cage with the lights on. And for the first time, something forbidden surfaced in Jennette. Resentment. Her happiness came at the cost of mine, she realized. I feel robbed and exploited. It was the first time she let herself think it. And thinking it terrified her, because you're not allowed to resent the sun. Then the ground gave way. The cancer was back, and Jennette found out almost by accident, through a shared family email, before her mother would even admit it to her. Deborah was dying again, and the whole household braced for another long orbit around her illness. In the middle of that, Jennette did the most ordinary teenage thing imaginable. She fell for someone, secretly, an older member of the crew. And when the story got out, her mother's response wasn't worry. It was annihilation. Deborah sent a message so vicious it's hard to read, degrading her daughter with the ugliest words she could find, and even blaming Jennette for the cancer itself. That was the price of stepping 1 inch outside her mother's control. And yet, because this is the impossible not at the center of the book, Jennette still loved her. Her dying mother asked her to sing a certain song at her funeral, and Jennette said yes. The way she'd always said yes. Still trying to be the daughter who could finally make her mother happy. Even now, love in this family came with conditions, and the deadline on it was running out. The end was slow and merciless. A seizure, a coma, one heartbreaking false recovery, where the family let themselves hope. And then a final decline at home in hospice. Deborah died on the very day Jennette was scheduled to host a big network event. The machine grinding on, even as the sun went dark. And now that opening image comes back. Remember the hospital bedside, the gift of being thin? That was the goal Deborah had set for her daughter's body all along. And Jennette had reached it and offered it up like flowers, hoping it might be the thing that finally woke her mother and made her proud. It didn't. Her mother never heard it. Jennette's reaction to the death was a single, numb text message. She just did. 3 words, no feeling, because the feeling was too big to hold. She had spent every day of her 21 years keeping one woman alive and happy. Now that woman was gone, and the question underneath the whole book rose up to meet her. Without Mom, who am I? Grief didn't soften Jennette. It detonated her. The eating disorder her mother had planted years earlier twisted into its most dangerous form. The coping tool she'd been handed as a child, now turning on her night after night. She drank to go numb every evening, chasing the off switch. She drifted into a relationship where she was too impaired to really consent, and she couldn't tell anymore whether that was closeness or just another way of disappearing. On the outside, she was still the smiling Nickelodeon star. On the inside, she was coming apart until she collapsed in a panic attack on a set she was supposed to be leading. And in the middle of all that, she says the network offered her a large sum of money. Money she understood as a payment to stay quiet about how she'd been treated. She refused it. That's her account. And refusing it cost her. She was vanishing in plain sight, and everyone around her just needed her to keep performing. Something had to break the spell. It turned out to be 4 words, said out loud by a stranger. The push came from someone who loved her. A partner gave her an ultimatum. Get help, or I can't keep watching you do this to yourself. And it was enough to get her into a therapist's office. Her name was Laura, and Laura listened to Jennette describe her childhood, the food, the secret, the control, describe the way you describe a happy home, because that was the only way Jennette knew how to see it. And then Laura said the sentence that split her world in half. Your mother taught you the eating disorder. She encouraged it. That's abuse. Jennette got up and left, because those words asked her to do the unthinkable. To look at the woman she'd spent her whole life worshiping, and admit that this woman had hurt her. It was easier to keep starving than to knock her mother off the pedestal. So she fled therapy, and she relapsed. But you can't unhear a true thing. The sentence was already inside her now, working the first brick loose. Real recovery, when it finally came, wasn't a lightning bolt. It was a second specialist, a patient, no-nonsense man named Jeff, who taught her the unglamorous work. How to make food ordinary again. How to stop treating a single slip as a total collapse. How to untangle her sense of self from a mother who was still running her life from beyond the grave. And the truths kept coming. She learned that the man who raised her wasn't even her biological father. That the story she'd been raised inside had yet another life folded into it. Piece by piece, she started taking things back. She got rid of her bathroom scale, refusing at last to let a number decide whether she was allowed to exist. And she made the choice that would have been unthinkable to Deborah. She walked away from acting entirely, and later turned down a nostalgic reboot of the show that made her famous. I want my life to be in my hands, she wrote. Not in eating disorders, not a casting director's, not my mother's. Mine. The book never sells you a fairy tale cure. She calls herself someone who still, sometimes, struggles. Recovery as a direction, not a finish line. But she was becoming someone. And there was one more place she had to go before she'd know who. The book ends at her mother's grave. And standing there, Jennette refuses to do the thing we're all trained to do with the dead. She refuses to lie. She looks at the loving words carved into the headstone, the pedestal in polished granite, and she says the hardest sentence a daughter can say. Her mother didn't deserve it. She names the abuse plainly, and she asks the question the whole book has been circling. Why do we romanticize the dead? Why can't we just be honest about them, especially our moms? And then, in the very same breath, she starts to cry, because she still misses her. That's the part people miss about that shocking title. This isn't hatred, and it isn't triumph. It's both things at once, the fury and the grief, held together, refusing to cancel each other out. She can say her mother hurt her, and that she loved her, and that she misses her, all true, all at the same time. That contradiction isn't a flaw in the book. It is the book. Being glad her mother died was never about the woman being gone. It's about the pedestal being gone. Because only with that pedestal finally empty could Jennette stand up in her own life and decide, for the first time, who she wanted to be. She wipes the dirt off her jeans, and she walks away. And she tells us, I know I'm not coming back. Not to the grave. Not to the girl who lived to make somebody else happy. If this one stayed with you, tell me in the comments. And be kind to each other down there. This book means a lot to a lot of people. What's the truth you think we're not allowed to tell about the people we've lost?